welcome to Let's Talk, a series of award-winning podcasts produced and delivered by the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. Each podcast focuses on an issue related to addiction, treatment, and recovery. I'm your host, William Moyers, and today we're joined by Susan Ford. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
You are an author, photojournalist, the youngest of 4 children to President and Mrs. Ford. We are appropriately here at the Betty Ford Center, where you're also on the board of trustees of the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. Your mother's legacy was as a breast cancer survivor and advocate, and as a woman in recovery, and as an advocate for being a woman in recovery. How has the legacy of your mother affected your role here at the Betty Ford Center?
Wow. Her shoes were really big to fill.
Yes.
So when she stepped down from the board and I became chairman, I think it was harder than living in the White House, actually, because Mother and I come from 2 different parts of recovery. She is a patient, and I as a family member. So we have very different opinions of things and what's important to us. One of the things that she made me do, which was extremely painful, was sit on every single committee and participate.
Oh my goodness.
Finance, I hate finance. But I learned it.
Sure.
And so I feel like she did a great job of preparing me to be chairman. So it's just we come at it from a different angle and a different perspective. Family and children's services is extremely important to me because that's how I was affected by this disease.
Did you come to the role of being the chair here at Betty Ford? Did you come to that reluctantly?
No, because I had been on the board for, probably 15 years. It had just been a long process. Mother was gracious and allowed me to raise my children before I came on the board because I was pregnant when the Betty Ford Center opened. So I don't think I came on the board until my youngest was 1st grade or 2nd grade. So she gave me some time to get my children raised and at least in school because it required several days travel and all of that and childcare and all the complications that we go through to participate in something like that.
Let's go back a little bit and talk about the history of the Betty Ford Center. There's a lot of people who think that when your mother found her own recovery in the late 70s that she went to the Betty Ford Center. It wasn't even here.
No, it wasn't.
How did the Betty Ford Center come to be?
John Sin from Eisenhower Medical Center decided that they wanted to have a treatment, and it had been in the plan at Eisenhower for some time. They wanted to have an alcoholic treatment center on the campus. And so Leonard Firestone, Mother's dear friend, was also on the board of Eisenhower. And so John Sin and Leonard kind of tag teamed her. And she was early in her recovery, about 4 years. But she agreed, and I thought that was a very courageous step to be so early in her recovery. So she came to all of us children and she said, when I'm long gone, you're the ones that are going to have to live with the fact that your mother had a drug and alcohol treatment center named after you. How do you feel about that?
Wow.
And we all said, we don't care. I mean, what a great legacy. She was one of the first to step out and share her story. So once we got past that, it was just a matter of Mother and Leonard raising the money to get this place started.
And of course, way back then in the early 1980s, the Hazelton Foundation played a role also in the birth of this place. Can you share just a little bit about that?
Well, Mother spent quite a bit of time, went back to Hazelton because Hazelton had done it so well. They were probably the leaders in the sense that they had been around the longest, and it was successful. There's lots of treatment centers that haven't been successful. So Mother went back and spent probably close to a week there, visiting with the counselors, visiting with the staff, talking, how do you do this? What did you do right? What did you do wrong? Why? What makes Hazelton successful? Because we basically wanted to copy what they had done, but in a different location.
Sure. Who would have ever imagined that decades later the two organizations would come together? And I want to come back to that in just a minute. But first, Susan, I want to address an issue that always bothers me, and that's that the Betty Ford Center is seen as a place for, you know, the rich and famous or the exclusive or those who can pay out of pocket. But that's not at all what's happening here, is it?
No, and less than 1% of the patients here are what we would think of as celebrities. Yes, we've had some celebrities, but so is Hazelton. I mean, so is other places. Right. Everybody needs treatment. It doesn't matter what you do that determines you need treatment. Mm-hmm. So, and they don't get treated any different than, right. My mother didn't get treated any different at Long Beach right. than, you know, the other people, the women she shared a room with. So it's the same.
Mm-hmm. Now, your mother did take some of the, your mother and the team took some of the very best that Hazelton had to offer and made it part of what was happening here. And I say here because we're in Rancho Mirage today. But there was a lot more to what was happening at the Betty Ford Center than just addiction treatment. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other components of the mission, such as SIMS and the children's program?
Well, the SIMS program, which is for medical students who are in medical school, and usually after their first year, we have medical students come out and spend a week, total immersion. They sit with patients, they not live with patients, but they are with patients from morning until evening to understand addiction, because in medical school, you don't get a lot of education about addiction. And so this is our way of teaching them about addiction, and in return, that as they become physicians, if they see a patient who they feel has a problem, they know where to turn to or where to send them to. Mm-hmm. So it serves both purposes. The letters that we get from the medical students are incredible, what they've learned and that sort of thing. And some of them choose to go into addiction, which is even better. So.
And the children's program?
The children's program, Mother hired Jerry Moe away from another center 22 years ago.
Yes.
And Jerry runs our children's program. Jerry is a Pied Piper. I'd follow Jerry anywhere. And what he does with children is amazing. He helps heal their hearts.
Yeah. Because as you know in your own experience, and I certainly know in my own experience, that addiction affects much more than just the person who suffers from it. It affects the entire family and particularly children.
Right. And so the children's program is for children from 7 to 12. You know, when people hear about a children's, you treat children, I'm like, well, no, they're not addicted. We treat them because they are affected by this disease and they are part of the process.
And it's very exciting to know, I mean, while some of that original expertise came from Minnesota down into the desert here to start the Betty Ford Center, some of it's gone the other way too. The SIMS program is now in Minnesota. The children's program is now in Minnesota, so it works both ways.
It has worked both ways, and I think that's the real beauty of us being the largest non-for-profit.
Yes,
that we can serve so many people in so many different ways.
Another thing that's gone the other way, if you will, is your mother's real passion, well, her recognition and her passion for gender-specific treatment as it relates to women. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, I think it started with her trying to get ERA passed.
Yes.
Which still hasn't passed.
Yes.
So women, get out there. But when she realized, when we started building our buildings out here, we had what we called a swing unit, all depending if we had more men in treatment or more women in treatment. That building became, well, it was co-ed too, and all depending which beds were which way. And then we realized, as most treatment centers did, is that some women do better when they are not in a co-ed hall because they've been physically abused by men. And the same goes for men. Men who go into a co-ed group sometimes pump up their chest because a woman is sitting in that group. Mm-hmm. So we learned that gender-specific treatment, that both patients do better And that's very important because you want your patient to leave here as well as they possibly can be. So she was a real pioneer in that, and we have always had equal beds for women and equal beds for men here. The other thing is women, it's harder for women to get into treatment.
Because?
Of families. The family depends on them.
Yes.
They're not necessarily the breadwinner, but they're the ones who run the houses and the kids. And so it's much more difficult for them to take possibly 30 days, 28 days, 16 days, 18 days, whatever it is, to take off and come here to get well.
And now your mother's bust is up in Center City, there on our campus at our women's unit.
Right, and so there is a Betty Ford Women's Unit up in Hazelton.
Yes.
So
the Betty Ford Center was here doing its good work in the desert from the early 80s up through the last 10 years. You moved on and did some other things at some point, but a couple of years ago, in around 2013, suddenly there was the opportunity, perhaps, for the two organizations to come together. What was your first reaction when you heard that there was this notion out there, this idea that perhaps the Betty Ford Center and the Hazelton Foundation could come together and be one?
I was relieved at the time because I saw the marketplace changing. As William, you've seen how treatment has changed, and now we're involved with insurance. It used to be a self-pay mode. Right. The market has changed, and so this Mother's mission was always to serve as many people as she possibly could and to help others, family, children, patients, and everything. So this really offered that opportunity. My role in that was Mother created a trust before she passed away that just the two of us were the trustees of that trust, and it controls her name. And so when Hazelton wanted to do the merger, they had to come to me because I'm the sole trustee of the trust and get permission for the merger.
So it was a merger of two organizations, but it was a collaboration of three entities, Hazelton, Betty Ford, and the Ford family.
Right.
And I know that was important because your mother never wanted her name just to be tossed around or put on a signpost in anywhere USA.
Right.
It mattered to her. That Ford name and the Betty Ford name meant a lot when it came to addiction treatment, didn't it?
It did, and sad to say, there are T-shirts and boxer shorts and all kinds of things that say the Betty Ford Clinic, the Betty Ford Center, that we continually have to shut down.
I did not realize that.
Oh yeah, it's interesting.
Does that speak then, your mother's commitment to quality, your mother's sensitivity to what it meant to have the Betty Ford name on a treatment center? Does that speak to your commitment to quality? I mean, I know you're the chair of the quality committee of the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. In addition to being on the board, you're also the head of quality.
Right.
Why is that a matter to you?
Staff and patient care. And when I think of patients, I think of the children in the children's program, the kids, the medical students in the SIMS program, anybody who is involved with us. I want them to have the best quality. We are the largest non-for-profit organization who treat drug and alcohol addiction. So we need to be the best. And so Betty Ford has always been the best. We need to stay in the market. We need to not necessarily follow the trends, we need to follow the trends that work. But we need to be the best in the market. And so that's why it's important.
Susan, do you feel any pressure as the daughter of President and Mrs. Ford? Do you feel any pressure to maintain that legacy, or does it just come natural to you?
There's a lot of pressure to it. And passing it down in the next generation is, I mean, you've seen it with your father. I have a daughter who's very interested in it, and she was very close to her grandmother. But she's not ready. She has young children. She's not ready. So I will carry the torch. See, you have to understand, when you go from, so many people think Well, there was President Nixon and there was President Carter, and they forget about the 2.5 years that we were there. So all of us family members continue to carry that torch. Yeah, we did exist. Inflation was horrible. My mother had breast cancer. My dad had 2 assassination attempts. A lot happened in those 2.5 years, and they made a difference.
Yes, they sure did make a difference.
So,
A difference to the continuity of democracy.
right,
That is always critical no matter who's in the White House.
right.
Because at the end of the day, democracy is about all of us, not about some of us.
Yeah.
And I think it's very powerful that you spoke that way. It was only, quote unquote, 2.5 years, but it was 2.5 years in the history of this country. And from that opportunity that came from the adversity of President Nixon stepping down before his term was over, from it came not only the opportunity for your parents to be in the roles that they were, but for this to be here, I would think, because your mother became more prominent as a first lady.
Absolutely.
Who had overcome breast cancer, and a first lady who had overcome substance use disorder and was willing not only to overcome it, not only had the ability to overcome it, but was willing to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And I think I want to close here with a little bit about the advocacy. How important, I mean, you know this, I know this, but the importance of advocacy around the illness of addiction and the power of recovery.
It's extremely important. It is not my forte. You will not find me up on Capitol Hill pounding tables, because I've lived a lot of that. It's important because we have got to change the way people think about this disease. Breast cancer has changed in the 40-some years since it all happened. Drug and alcohol addiction has not changed at the same pace or rate that breast cancer has. It's still, you know, when you think about 23 million people are touched or diagnosed with this disease and only 10% get treatment, that has to change. And the only way to change that is through policymakers and the public. We've got to change their attitude about this disease.
I agree with you on that, and not only do I agree on that with you, but I agree with everything else you've said. I disagree with you on one point. You are an advocate, because here you are in front of the camera on a Let's Talk podcast, sharing your own family story, your story, the power of addiction in your family, the power of recovery that's alive and well at the Betty Ford Center. So I would say you're a darn good advocate. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your own busy life to be part of this and sharing your own experience, strength, and hope with our audience today. Susan Ford, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Mike.
And thanks to all of you for joining us on another edition of Let's Talk, a series of podcasts that brings these issues to you. On behalf of our executive producer, Lisa Stangl, and the great crew at Blue Moon Productions, I'm your host, William Moyers. We'll see you again.